Welcome back to session 2 of the Aleph-Bet Mishnah, and thanks for being here today. I'm really already enjoying this a lot, and as I said before, I love teaching Mishnah because I think of it as roots, Jewish roots, and I like teaching it in this manner because our subject matter is going to change each time. And for me, that just keeps it lively and interesting. And, last time we learned about proper mindset for tefillah. We'll review that Mishnah in a second. But today we're going to talk about some communal matters, financial communal matters when we start out. So those are two such very different topics, and yet they both fall under the category of Jewish wisdom and culture. And for me, that's what the Mishnah is. It's a great repository of Jewish wisdom and culture. And it's a jumping off point for meaningful conversation about what that means to us today. It's a kind of text which asks for our commentary and for our involvement. And the truth is, we are dialoguing with the rabbis of the Mishnah. You're allowed to engage them, argue with them, say, no, I don't think that's true. That's partly why we maintain minority opinions, and we'll see that there's more than one opinion offered in many of the Mishnayot. And sometimes when there's more than one opinion, they're kind of unconcerned with which one wins. All right, this guy wins, but we don't really care about that. We're much more interested in the dialectic and the process which led us to it. And so I see that as an invitation to us also to be in that dialogue with the classics. Now, just to do a little bit of review, okay? If you remember, there we go. Can you see the 6 seders back up there? If you remember, the whole Mishnah we refer to as the Mishnah, and is divided into 6 sidarim. One seder, many sidarim. Zra'im, Moed, Nashim, Nezikin, Kodashim, and Taharot. Within these 6 seders, Shisha Sidarim, within each of them are many volumes. In Hebrew, Masechtot. That's a weird word, but you'll catch on to it. Yes, Barbara. You got to unmute.
We were to learn those, and just as I'm looking at it right now, in number 5, Kachim, is there a spelling error in the Hebrew? Yeah.
Yes, there is.
Okay.
Yes, that says
Kashdim.
Kashudim, or yeah, I don't even think that's a word.
Okay. I feel
Chesed
better.
is spelled, yeah.
I just noticed that though.
Good. Yeah, isn't that funny? I've looked at this for a long time.
It's hard when you've seen something over
yeah.
and over and over again. It's hard to pick up stuff.
Sometime, Barbara, remind me, I'll tell you a couple of funny stories about misspells and catching them, print errors, things like that. Everybody wave hello to my father-in-law.
Hello, nice to see you, Alan.
We just started our review. Yeah, good. Within each of the Sidarim, the orders, the Seders, are the Masechtot, the volumes, and you can see they deal with the smaller individual subject matter. Mishnah, Seder, Masechet, volume that it's in, and then we have chapter and Mishnah, the individual Mishnah. That's how we refer to like a verse within the Mishnahs. Hello, Mom. Okay, so we're gonna, each time we look at an individual Mishnah, we're going to locate it within the larger structure. Okay. Good. All right, let me share the other piece. Any questions up to there? No, we're just going to jump right in. Okay. Do you see the little mail notifications that come up in screen share? Or do you just see, like when I get a mail notification that comes in the middle of class, do you see that? Or it only shows you the piece I tell it to show you? Yeah, okay, that's interesting. Not that I care if you see my, my email from JCPenney or anything, but okay, good. Okay. As I said, we're going to review a little bit. Our first one, which began with Aleph, is in Mishnah Brachot, which is the first Seder Moed, the first Masechet Brachot, which deals with, amongst other things, prayer. And this is chapter 5, Mishnah 1, where we talked about the proper frame of mind, that we don't stand up for prayer. Welcome, Steve. Unless we're in the proper frame of mind. And we talked about how there was this group of Hasidim Rishonim, these early proto-rabbinic figures, we're not really sure who they are, who meditated intensely before they prayed in order to direct their heart towards God. And we talked about the value of that, of warming up, of getting into the right frame of mind, how you can't just walk in and expect to be in the right frame of mind always. And then we had this interesting second half of the Mishnah where it gives two extreme examples of possible interruptions in tefillah, in our prayer, and how you shouldn't interrupt your prayer even if the king comes and greets you, which is both disrespectful of the office and, of course, dangerous, or even if a snake wraps itself around your heels. And we had a discussion about whether that was realistic or not, and why the Mishnah would use such an extreme example to make its point about the proper frame of mind and the importance of interruptions. Okay, Mishnah Bet. If you recall, our method is going to be, I'm going to read through and look through at the Hebrew because sometimes it's meaningful, but we're going to jump back and forth a little bit between the Hebrew and the English. So if you don't know the Hebrew, don't worry about it. It's only at the beginning. And I'll read and translate back and forth a little bit. Okay. B'nei ha'ir shemachru rechova shel ir. That's our case. The Mishnah often will just present a case. And in this case, it's B'nei ha'ir, the inhabitants of a town, who want to sell a piece of joint communal property, real estate, the town square. Don't get too hung up on analogy to like our town square kind of thing, but it means there's a communal property that we all own together. It's communally held, or you could say there's a partnership, ownership, and the inhabitants want to sell it, and they do sell it. And the question then is, what can they use the money for? So, with the money, they may purchase with that money Beit HaKnesset, a synagogue. And now, well, that makes sense, right? Now you sell a piece of commercial real estate. From the Mishnah's point of view, certainly you could use the profits from that sale to buy a holy piece of real estate, a synagogue for the community, right? That's better than a market, something like that. Okay, good. Now, they're going to go through a list of increasing holinesses. If the Beit HaKnesset, what if they sold the Beit HaKnesset? You see, the logical question is, If you sell the town square and you can buy a synagogue with the profit, well, my next logical question is, what about if I sell the synagogue? Turns out that could actually be a valuable question for a Jewish community to consider. What's the consequence of selling your Beit HaKnesset? Lokchim teva. If you sell the synagogue with the money you obtained from the sale of the synagogue, you can purchase an ark, an Aron Kodesh, like a place to put your Torahs. If you sell the Torah, the ark, you can use that profit to acquire wrappers and cloaks, dressing, textiles for your Torah scrolls. The produce of selling wrappers, if you sell the dressings for it, you can buy individual sfarim, individual scrolls of, and by the way, here, the word is sfarim, which is the modern Hebrew word for books, but they don't mean a book like we mean a book, like this is a book. Because of course, in the days of the Mishnah, there were no books. Books, i.e. things that have covers on them and pages of paper, that is a later technology. This did not exist in the first century. They had scrolls. Excuse me. Excuse me. So when they say a book, they mean the content, the subject matter. And what they mean is an individual book of the Torah. So if you sold a bunch of Torah covers, you could buy a Sefer Breshit, a book of Genesis. Now, interestingly enough, one of the things this teaches us is you can learn a little history from this, which is in the first century, they did not have a Torah scroll where the books of the 5 books of Moses were sewn together. They had individual scrolls. They had a book of Genesis that they wrote on parchment. They had a scroll of Exodus, a scroll of Leviticus. And, they would hold them up like we hold up a scroll, but they weren't all rolled and sewn together. That comes soon, but not quite yet. And you can tell that because they're talking about the individual books which you can purchase. And, of course, the logical thing, which you'll probably guess, if you sell an individual sacred book, a Torah scroll may be purchased. Okay, so our order is, you sell the Beit HaKnesset, the synagogue, you can buy the ark. You sell the ark, you can buy the coverings. You sell the coverings, you can buy a scroll. You sell an individual scroll, you can buy a Sefer Torah. That's the pinnacle. Any questions about that? It's logical, yes? It makes sense.
Not financially.
Right.
Okay. Hang on, because obviously, if you sell the town's, a Sefer Torah is very costly. I don't know if you know what a new Torah scroll, it sort of costs a person's yearly salary. It takes a person, 8 months to a year to write a Sefer Torah. So a brand new Torah scroll, costs a lot of money. You got to sustain a scribe for a year. Now those guys aren't getting rich or anything, but they still have to be paid. There's at least a minimum livelihood. Okay, but it's probably less than commercial real estate. That's true. And it's not clear that the sale is $100, $100, $100, $100, or that there's even a straight line up in value or a straight line down in value. In other words, textiles may be much less expensive than Torah scrolls. So what's the operative element here?
It's a religious value.
Yeah, it's a religious thing, right? It's holiness. These things are holier than the previous thing. And if you sell something that's communally held, you can sell it for an item. You can use the profit of that to buy something that is more holy.
But you can't jump from the town square to a Torah?
Presumably you can, right? But if you, again, if we made that jump, you would have to ask all of the smaller incremental steps along the way. So by phrasing it out this way, they cover a few steps in between that for some reason they want to articulate ark, covering, scroll, and Torah.
And so we're trying to figure out why they have that progression. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I think that is a question, right? Why those specific items, though they are all, and Beit Knesset, right? The synagogue itself. You can sell the town square, buy the synagogue. Once you're in the synagogue, things get, much more directed holiness towards the Torah. Look, this is a statement of communal priority. Right? It's a values clarification statement. By the way, now let's hang on to your question, Cindy, okay? Because the Mishnah is going to walk back in the opposite direction. However, but if you sold a Torah scroll, it will not be lawful to apply that money for the purchase of an individual sacred book, nor individual wrappers for the sacred books, nor an ark for the purchase of a wrapper, nor a synagogue with the proceeds of an ark. In other words, the law works in one direction, holiness acquisition works in one direction, but you cannot do the opposite. And if you sell the ark to obtain a synagogue from the sale of a synagogue. I'm sorry, I messed that up. And even so, in respect of any surplus funds. That's the question, right? Who said it's not financially logical? They know that if you sell a Torah scroll and you buy an individual scroll, that you'll have extra money, right? They know that whatever it is, however this is arranged, even if you meet the need, you sell the synagogue, you buy the Torah scroll, you got a lot of money left over. What can you do with that money and what can't you do with it? Because of course you're going to buy a Torah scroll, you're going to have a lot of money left over. You can't use Torah money to buy a synagogue, but where does the holiness inhere? Is a synagogue building actually holy? And does that mean that, what about the bricks of that building? If I were to knock down our building to build another building, just as good, just the same, better, whatever it was, doesn't matter. I'm not trying to engage that argument. Does that mean that those bricks could not be used for some other purpose? If we somehow managed to sell a large synagogue building and bought a smaller synagogue building, what would be the limits that we would place on the extra funds? Yeah, Barbara.
Can we use the money that we get from selling the synagogue to pay off our mortgage or debts from that synagogue and then move to another location?
Well, then it's not surplus, really.
Well,
Well,
how
he
about
used
this?
the word surplus, but it is money that wasn't directly, that money wasn't there before. We got that money.
Right. It seems, look, the Mishnah only addresses a few things, right? And so our analogy to ourselves is going to be a little bit nuanced, but it does seem like you could not spend proceeds from, what if we sold our sidurim? Could you pay down your mortgage with the proceeds of selling sidurim?
Yes.
Now, I'm not asking you as a member of the Bethel board, right? Because let's just say that makes sense, right? You got a closet full of books. Someone's willing to give you a few $1,000s for those books. I have to buy another Torah scroll that I don't need instead of, could I pay my employees? Could I pay a janitor?
Okay. Before you get to that question, there's something else that in there that was very interesting and that we have done.
Yes, Suzanne, what?
It's not right according to this Mishnah, and that's sold our old prayer books to a smaller congregation.
Right. Yes. Isn't that a good thing?
Yeah, I would think so.
Why that's a good thing, right?
Not?
My synagogue in New York City, when I started there, it was one of the oldest synagogues in New York, dated back to the 1850s. We had original Torah scrolls that were brought from Poland. They were not in usable condition. And for over 150 years, we had accumulated more than 20 Torah scrolls. It was a big shul in its heyday. Lots of things. Somebody has a big occasion. They dedicate a new Torah scroll. You know, New York was growing, right? Lots of money to spread around. Over the years, they bought lots of Torah scrolls. And most of them were not usable. In some way, were not kosher. But we sold several of them to smaller congregations because they could be fixed relatively easily. And a small congregation could pay us $5,000 for an old Sefer Torah, spend another $1,000, and for $6,000 have a usable Torah instead of buying a new one for $30,000. So we were very happy to do that. And we were a young person's congregation. We didn't have 15 grand just sitting around. So selling 3 Sifrei Torah was a reasonable thing for us to do. Now, we didn't go and spend that money, on pizza. We spent it on the shul, but we spent it on the shul.
But isn't the Mishnah saying that that's not what you're supposed to do with the money? That if you get money from something that's holy, you need to spend it on something that's as holy or holier.
Right. So we repaired several of our Sifrei Torah. We used the money to repair, to acquire kosher Sifrei Torah. That was true. And then here's where your question and Suzanne's point come together, okay? Because the Mishnah is not done yet. So we read here, nor an ark for the proceeds of wrappers, nor can you buy a synagogue with the proceeds of an ark. That's your point right there, Cindy, right? You can't buy a synagogue. I can't make brick and mortar decisions with stuff that was more spiritual and holy. I got to move up the holiness scale. And even with respect to the money, it seems to suggest here, and this is quite a radical thing to suggest, but I do think it's what they're saying is holiness inheres in money when it is made from the sale of holy things. If you sell a Sefer Torah, the money itself is holy. Otherwise, this doesn't make sense. Hold on to that thought. I want to come back to that for a second. Now, here's the end. According to Rabbi Meir, we're going to have a minority opinion expressed here, expressed in the name of Rabbi Meir. If you remember last time, Rabbi Meir is one of the principal constructors and authors, editors of the Mishnah. He's the primary teacher of Rabbi Yehuda, who is considered the editor and author of the Mishnah. So it doesn't get any really more authoritative than Rabbi Meir. According to Rabbi Meir, it is unlawful to sell sacred public property to private individuals. Is Rabbi Meir, this is a question I will ask you often. Is Rabbi Meir being strict or lenient? You cannot sell a holy communal property to a private, non-communal individual.
Strict.
He's being strict. This is a stricter point of view. In the first part of the Mishnah, we were allowed to sell the synagogue. You just couldn't use the proceeds for pizza, gas money. Rabbi Meir comes and adds an additional level of stringency. You thought it was strict already. Rabbi Meir is saying it's more strict because its sanctity thereby becomes lowered. Its kedusha, its holiness gets lowered. We're just going to sell the synagogue building. Is there no limit to what we will allow to take place in the synagogue after we sell it?
Where does
You sell a synagogue and you sell it to a church and they use it as a church. By the way, my old synagogue in New York sold its old building, which was up in Harlem, and it became a church. That happens all the time. I've been in many synagogues that used to be churches. Archaeologically, you can find 1,000 examples of that. People always build a church where there once was a synagogue, and then they build a mosque where there once was a church. Then they knock down the mosque and they build another church. Right? That is the way it happens. But he's saying, no, the kedusha is going to be lowered. So, okay, we would be comfortable selling our synagogue to a church. Great. Maybe the JCC, a youth center, a school, maybe even a developer, right, who's going to put up an apartment building. What about a strip club? You sell your synagogue if you know that they're going to open a strip club there?
I think a strip club is a little bit of an extreme example.
Thank
But can I sell the building to a dentist who wants to move his practice there?
Right. Something secular. See, I appreciate the compliment. Yes, it is an extreme example, but it's a legal thing. I didn't say, a drug den or prostitution ring. Strip clubs are legal. You don't have to like them.
Oh, come on. In Alabama, they're not well thought of.
I'm sure that's true. That's why I said it. It's something that's not well thought of, but that, it could be.
So at the present time, Bethel has a space that is not being used for a holy purpose and is being rented out to yoga teachers and I don't remember who else. Not allowed, huh?
Well, by the way, that's renting, not selling. Renting is really a different thing. And in that sense, we still own it, right? We're still the possessors of it. I actually think that's a great little target market for us to be a sort of health and wellness place.
Oh, sure. I don't disagree with it. I'm just, I think it's a great idea. I'm just asking.
But I could argue,
I
could argue against it too, Margaret.
Yeah.
Right. Because who wouldn't we rent to?
Exactly.
There's nothing wrong with Reiki, right? I have nothing. There's no problem with Reiki. But you could say this is a alternative, religion. This is, what if someone wanted to run a yoga place that had a guru and they wanted pictures of the guru up? That's kind of pagan, right? Perfectly legal, nothing wrong with it. It's all good. But, right, in other words, I think there are lines. It's sort of difficult to draw the lines. It's one of those sorties paradoxes, if you know what that means. And the Mishnah is often going to deal with these. You can't do that. There's no way you could sell the synagogue to a strip club. I mean, come on. We all know you can't do that. That would diminish the sanctity and it would be shameful. Dentist, I don't know, right? At what point, church, sure. Dentist, maybe. Strip club, no, right? There's not a clear place where suddenly it becomes wrong. 1, 2, 3 grains of sand is not a pile. How many grains is a pile? Well, if you see a pile of sand, that's a pile of sand, right? But there's no point where it's not a pile, except at the very end of there's no clear line. Things like that are really hard. How about this? Yeah, Barbara, hold one question because I just want to make it even a little more complicated. Is there a limit to who we can take money from? If money carries moral and holiness value, can we take money from a convicted criminal? Can we put his name up?
As long as you take it down.
Put it up quick, just so we can take
it. Depends on
down.
the crime.
Right, look, and nonprofits deal with this. That is a real life active issue at dozens of places where somebody who made the money in a bad way, and not an big ambivalently bad way, a bad way. Doesn't this redeem the money?
Take a picture.
Couldn't you make the argument? This guy made the money badly, but what are we gonna just let it sit there? Or are we gonna turn it around and spread Torah and chesed and goodness and make bad out of something good? I mean, good out of something bad.
But is it up to us to launder the money for him?
Well,
Is that
it's not law. I mean,
well, not in the strictest sense, but
right. Are we
to make it holy?
Right. Does it redeem the money or not?
Yeah.
Yeah, Barbara.
Look,
I was just, other Barbara?
No, go ahead, Barbara.
Okay, I was just thinking about when you're talking about tearing a building down and what's real and what's not. And, there's a lot of historic preservation where you can't tear certain aspects of a building down. So if you wanted to take our temple, which I'm sure is a historic property, I would assume, and tear it down and rebuild on the site another temple, even, that was sort of what was going through my mind. If you just want to replace a temple on the same site, I don't know how this would apply.
Interesting. Yeah, I don't know. I think it gets really complicated.
Mhm.
Your question made me think, when they tear down old stadiums and they sell seats,
Yeah.
and you can buy a seat from the old Brave Stadium, right? And people buy it,
Yeah.
right? By the way, you can buy old church pews. You can go to like antique stores and buy old church pews, and people put them in their houses. Even if we stayed in this place, but we changed things around and we took out the pews, could we sell them to individual members to sit and put in their own houses? Or what would you do with the wood? If not recycle it?
What's holy
Yeah,
about a
Suzanne.
pew?
What's that?
Well, I said, what's holy about a pew? I mean,
Right. If it's not actually let's play that out. I mean, when the only thing that makes our synagogue holy is us. That's it. Otherwise, it's just raw material.
yeah.
Right? I mean, it's just a building. If it suddenly disappeared, would we be any less holy? We would not. I mean, we would miss it, obviously, and all, but it's just a building. There was a time when it wasn't there. There will be a time when it isn't there. No building stands forever. So the holiness is because of what we do there. If we prayed somewhere else, that place would be holy,
Right.
and not this place. If we prayed at the next address down, that address would be holy, not our address. So does the holiness really inhere in this place at all? The bricks, the stone, the wood, the stuff? I don't know, maybe not. Yeah, one last thing, and then I want to do one other Mishnah. Yeah, Suzanne. And then Barbara. Okay, I'll do it, Suzanne, and then Barbara B. Yeah.
Is there an out? Like if a life is at stake, you can,
Right. Yes.
you can violate the Shabbos.
The
So what
out.
if the congregation can't afford to be in the building and is going to go bankrupt?
Yes, there is. It's sort
Can
of
they
the
sell
last
to a
line.
strip club?
There is an out. Okay, hang on one second. Yeah, Barbara.
My question was about the cleaning the money or accepting donations from people. We've just been through two examples of that, Madoff and Milken. So,
Yeah, right.
Okay.
Exactly.
And when I was at the seminary, Ivan Boesky had made a large donation to the seminary, like repair the library size donation. And before any of the work had been done, he fell from grace. And they gave back the money and didn't do the work. But let me tell you, they argued about it. They were like, holy cow, we could build a new library. Otherwise, this money is going to go to his lawyers. But they gave it back. They were like, we cannot put his name on the side of our library.
Our daughter was at Brandeis when the Madoff bit happened, and Brandeis and Hadassah and a bunch of other organizations ended up returning the dollars.
Yeah. He was an equal opportunity screwer. Yeah. Okay, so the out is the sages disagree with Rabbi Meir. They have an argument. Rabbi Meir says we need to be more strict. Sanctity must be maintained. But the sages say, if so, it would also prohibit a large town to sell sacred things to a smaller town because there's fewer people. If I can't sell from a corporate entity to an individual, well, then I can't sell from a large corporate entity to a small corporate entity. In other words, the sages kind of come in and save us from a lot of this at the end. They make the argument, which is often the case in Sordy's paradoxes, where there's no clear line of where the line should be drawn. They say, if you don't draw the line leniently, there's no end. Ein ladavar sof. You only have to search so far for chametz before Pesach. Because if you say you have to search everywhere, there's no end. Now I have to pull the drywall off my house. Right? There's no end. And it becomes irrational and illogical. You cannot chain people in such a way so that they can't sell their buildings. Now, you can have rules about it, what you can do with holy profit, what you can do with ill-gotten gain. But the Mishnah at least seems to end here with the more lenient position of the sages and the more lenient process position of the sages. Don't place giant restrictions. So after they lay out the articulation of holiness goes up and not down, they also allow a measure of practicality. And that would be my counsel for any synagogue struggling with this kind of stuff today. Maintain an important level of holiness and morality in what you do. Don't entertain those kinds of things that bring disrespect and dishonor to what we've done in this sacred space. And be reasonable, or there is no end to how strict you could become. Now you cannot do anything with anything. Okay, I want to move on. I want to do at least one more today. Gimel. Our Gimel number, because this is a completely different topic. So clear your head out. We'll locate it. It's in Chulin, just so that we can identify where we are. Here's Chulin. It's in the holiness Seder. So it deals with things of the temple, right? Animal sacrifices, meal offerings, all that kind of stuff. Chulin, like Chol HaMoed, the ordinary days of the holiday. Chol means things that are not holy, ordinary, unkodesh, unhallowed. And here it specifically refers to slaughter, animal slaughter, but not for sacrificial purposes, meaning kosher slaughter. And the primary halachot, the primary laws of kosher slaughter are to be found in the Mishnah in Masechet Chulin. Okay? So that's where we are. And the specific inyan, the specific issue is the Gid HaNasheh. So we're in Chulin 7:1. The Gid HaNasheh is the sinew which shrank. What is that? Any Bible scholars here? Which sinew are we talking about?
The one that was injured, but
Right.
when during the wrestling with.
Correct. That's right. The Jacob, if you recall, in the book of Genesis, Jacob is injured in his wrestling with God and this angel and this thing, man, appearance, wounded in the back of his thigh. And the Bible is actually explicit there. It says that's why to this day, meaning it was written later, that's why to this day, the Israel does not eat that, the sinew in the thigh. And of course, it's why there's no, it's the rear quarter sinew. It's the sciatic nerve, basically. It's a long, long nerve that runs all the way down the butt and through the lower thigh of large mammals. And it's not kosher. You can't eat it. It's why there's not, London broil, I think. How's that for a vegan reference, right? Because it's so difficult to remove the gid hanasheh, that sinew, and the thing that surrounds it and all that stuff in such a way. The laws around it are very, very specific. So it's just very expensive to remove it. So they just sell that quarter of meat to non-kosher consumption, even in kosher slaughter.
You can actually get it
Right.
kosher, but it's very expensive.
That's right. It's a specialty market. Okay. Gid hanoshe noheg ba'aretz uvechutz la'aretz. The law of not eating the sinew, I'm just going to call it gid hanasheh in Hebrew anyways, because now you know what it is obligatory. It operates both in Eretz Yisrael, in the Holy Land, and out of the Holy Land. There are some mitzvot which only apply to the land of Israel, especially agricultural laws, certain things that you only have to do in the land of Israel and not outside the land of Israel. Okay, that makes sense. But this rule of kashrut, just so you know, wherever you live, you cannot eat it, both in Eretz Yisrael and outside. Bifnei habayit, both when the temple existed, it was against the rules. V'shelo bifnei habayit, and when the temple no longer existed. So that tells you this Mishnah is constructed, at least in part, or edited finally, after the final destruction of the temple. It applies bechulin uvekodashim, both in regular, ordinary slaughter, things meant for consumption by people, and in respect to holy slaughter, meaning things that are meant for sacrifices in the temple. V'noheg b'behema uvechaya. And it applies to both wild and domesticated animals, right? There's all kinds of different kosher rules about animals that are raised, domesticated, versus animals which are found naturally in herd animals, right? But doesn't matter. Even if you captured the animal wild and you didn't raise it, you still can't eat gid hanasheh. So in and out of the Eretz Yisrael, in all periods of Jewish history, any kind of consumption whatsoever, and all kinds of animals, and to both the right and the left thigh of the animals. So is this a lenient or a strict kind of legal structure?
Strict.
Yeah.
Yeah, it seems pretty strict, doesn't it? I mean, this is what they could say. It applies only inside the land of Israel and not outside. That would be a little more lenient. Or it applied when there was a temple, but now that there's not a temple, it doesn't apply. Right? And that would make sense because it's in Kodashim. It's in the part of the Mishnah that deals with the temple. So it would be logical to think this is a kind of thing which doesn't apply post-temple, but it does. Now, however, there are some exceptions. It does not, however, apply to fowl, right, to flying things, chickens, turkeys, pheasants, geese, ducks, all those things, since they do not have one. Right? That's very logical, right? I mean, I like that. It's kind of very practical. Geese do not have a sciatic nerve. They don't have a hind quarter like that. So it does not apply to that meat, okay? And it does apply, however, to a fetus in embryo. How's that for a stringency? Meaning what? Cindy, you look confused.
I'm terrified. Well, now, okay, so it's saying, that you can't eat any of these things, and now it's telling you that you can't eat a fetus and an embryo. Is that what it's saying?
Well, it's saying that you cannot eat the sciatic nerve of a fetus in embryo.
Well, what the heck?
Who eats fetuses and embryos?
I mean, I guess, is that to make an extreme point?
No. Well, I mean, I guess it's an extreme point, but it's a practical consideration.
Well, there were civilizations. There were civilizations at that time who practiced child slaughter.
This is not a human fetus.
Oh, okay.
No, humans are never kosher. I get it. Yeah, no.
Okay, so we're talking about, are we talking about eggs?
No, we're talking about a cow.
We're talking about animals.
About the cow. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm a little
Yes.
slow.
No. It's perfectly understandable. A cow fetus,
Uh-huh.
people eat that. First of all, you could. They did surgery on animals in the ancient world.
Okay.
So, I mean, I don't know how successful or not it was, but they could potentially have harvested a fetus. But I think what it really means is you slaughter an animal and you discover that they're pregnant.
Okay.
That makes sense.
And so it's like there's another carcass
Okay.
inside. Is that free? Look, I don't eat this stuff. Okay, so for me, this is all disgusting.
Get ready to stop.
Okay.
Just saying.
So like,
After
but-
this, that's nobody will.
but stuff like this, like people eat everything. Okay, so I'm just gonna accept. And people ate like fetal chicken eggs, anicle. I mean, there's all kinds of weird stuff like that people eat, like and that are part of cuisines and stuff. Anyways, so I accept all this is gross, but the question is, I want us to consider it strictly from a legal point of view. Right? We're scholars. We're refining our mind and our capabilities here. I could argue that until the calf is born, laws do not apply to it. So a person who benefits from slaughtering a cow by finding a fetus in that cow, that's like a found financial benefit, does not have to subject that financial benefit to the law, and therefore it's a leniency and a benefit to that person. Or you could say, nope, the law applies in utero as well as not in utero. If you found that extra financial benefit of a second carcass of meat, too bad, it's still, even though it wasn't born, it's still subject to the law, and you cannot eat the Gida Nashem. It's a stringency, leniency question. When does the law apply? And when does it not apply? Where does it apply and where does it not apply? How? Left, right only, or left and right? You see? And clearly, the consensus of the Mishnah here is that it applies in stringency almost everywhere, except in fowl, where it doesn't even make any sense. You can't extend the stringency to chickens because they don't even have this feature. But if I can extend the stringency, I'm gonna. That's the idea of this Mishnah. Now there's going to be a disagreement. Rabbi Yehuda says it does not apply to the fetus in embryo, right? So Rabbi Yehuda has a more lenient opinion. And he has a secondary lenient opinion. He allows the suet, the fat that surrounds the Gid HaNasheh, which most do not permit. Okay, so there's a lenient position, but let's admit that it's a relatively narrow leniency, right? Just the fat he allows, still not the nerve itself and the sheath around it, just a little bit of fat that's around that, which everybody else makes you remove. That seems extreme to him. Okay, everybody clear on that? Any questions on any of that? All right, one last piece, then we'll open it up. Now, according to Rabbi Meir, here again, we see at the end of the Mishnah, Rabbi Meir offers a position, and the sages again are going to disagree with him. Rabbi Meir, the assertion of butchers in respect to having removed the Gid HaNasheh is not to be relied on. But the sages hold that they may be relied on in this respect and in regard to removal of the suet. So Rabbi Meir says, if a butcher tells you that they have removed the Gid HaNasheh, you may not rely on that testimony. But the sages say you may rely on that testimony. Why? What is the svara? What's the svara? What's the reasoning, the thinking behind Rabbi Meir? He doesn't tell us why he says, don't believe the butchers. But that's generally speaking, if somebody testifies to something, certainly they know, a butcher would know about the sciatic nerve and how to remove it. They would know technically all of the stuff they need to know to be a valid testimony. But someone comes to the judge and says, is this cow kosher? Is this meat kosher? And the butcher says, I have removed the sciatic nerve. The judge is not to believe them, according to Rabbi Meir. And by the way, neither are you. You have to have some independent verifier. What's Rabbi Meir's reasoning?
Well, maybe the fetus is too small.
This is not just in regard to the fetus, by the way. Rabbi Meir's comment
I didn't
applies
understand
to
that.
the whole Gid HaNasheh.
But
Right?
yeah,
That's good, Margaret. There's two machlokot, two disagreements. One is the minority opinion with regard to the fetus in utero, where Rabbi Yehuda says, nah, you can do that. That's not subject. He has a whole different opinion. I'm sure he has a reasoning that is halachot do not apply to animal fetuses in utero. And therefore it doesn't apply to this one, right? I mean, like, to him, probably all the laws, whatever law it is, don't apply necessarily. Or something like that. I'm speculating. Okay, but this is, now we've settled the, that's a minority opinion about the fetus. The Chachamim's opinion, the sage's opinion is the dominant opinion, and clearly it does apply in utero. But now Rabbi Meir is making a comment on Gid HaNasheh in general. You cannot trust a butcher when he says, I have done this.
he
Yes,
has
Suzanne.
a financial incentive to say.
Bingo. A little financial incentive or a big financial incentive? A big one. It's a big one. I'm sure you know there's a dozen good examples of large cases brought against kosher producers for faking it. They bought a big bin of those little metal clips that they put on the birds to say that they're kosher. And then they bought a big truck full of non-kosher birds and clipped the clips on and sold them as kosher, twice the cost. That's a very significant financial incentive. And the rabbis recognized financial incentive. as a very powerful human motivator, because it is a very powerful, like on all the cop shows where they're like, it's the oldest motive, money. People lie in business to make more money. And when the incentive is strong enough, it will overcome a person's morality. Pretty much anybody. You can tempt people like pretty much anybody. You got to be pretty dedicated to resist what for you would be a strong financial benefit. When what's the harm? You start to make excuses. You start to, shave corners and standards and all that kind of thing. And butchers are enough invested, and the financial incentive is strong enough, according to Rabbi Meir, that we cannot trust their testimony about this. The sages say otherwise. They either think people will tell the truth more, or they think the financial incentive is not significant enough. We don't really quite know what their reasoning is, but Rabbi Meir takes the machmir, the chumrah, the strict position, and the chachamim take the kula, the lenient position. And of course, the Mishnah ends not telling us. Generally speaking, sages versus an individual, the halacha follows the sages. But not always. There are times.
Usually more liberal, or not, the sages.
That is a good question. No, I don't think there's any broad trend where minority opinions are more liberal or not liberal. I think sometimes one, sometimes the other. It often depends, do they have an overarching legal philosophy which applies in that case? If I believe that a certain standard should be used in all cases where meat is involved, then this is a case where meat is involved. By the way, I give that as an example because the Talmud itself says, Safek Bisra Lechumra. In cases that surround meat and kosher meat that are suspect, I don't mean suspect like, I wonder. Like, I mean a case where you don't know, is it or isn't it? You default to strict, it isn't. There are things where if you don't know whether it is, I don't know, is there something, whatever, I don't know. Is it Shabbos yet or isn't it Shabbos yet? Well, if you genuinely don't know, you might be able to adopt a lenient position and say, okay, you can still light a candle, quick, right? That makes sense. But I don't know about meat. Nope. There's a standard tendency towards stringency. So that may be what's driving Rabbi Meir. And the sages just say, yeah, but this is not really suspect, or something like that. Yeah, Barbara, you had your hand up.
So my question is related to the fowl versus mammal.
Mm-hmm.
In this case, fowl is accepted, accepted.
Right. Exempted, yeah.
Exempted. So how does
they're egg-exempted.
It's always bothered me, or right now it bothers me for the last 15 minutes. The idea of mixing milk and meat. It says because you can't put it with its mother's milk. The meat with chickens don't have milk.
It's correct.
They don't fit the same category.
That is correct.
So why? I mean, I want that chicken parmesan, the nice fresh provolone and everything.
So So what's up with that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So that is an excellent question, Barbara. I'm so glad you asked it because it really does. It's going to deepen our thinking about how do you apply the law? Right? The law just says, right? It's statutory. It just states something. the question of, do you apply it narrowly? Do you apply it broadly? Do you tend towards a lenient interpretation or a strict one? Those seem like simple questions, but they end up with making very significant differences in how it plays out. So the meat and milk one is a great example. Okay, all the Torah says is, do not cook a kid in its mother's milk. So if we applied that law very strictly, we read it with a narrow application, we would say calf A in the milk of mother A is prohibited. Calf A in the milk of mother B, not prohibited, because it says bechelev imo, its mother. Another mother is not subject to the law. So you could cook the kid in another mother's milk. It's not unreasonable. It actually makes sense. It depends how you want to apply the law. You could say, this only applies to cows. Right? Not to kids, to goats. Right? Goat A in goat mother B. But goat in any other mother's milk of any other species of mammal that's permissible, cows in cow's milk, right? This is strictly a goat thing, and strictly a goat in its own mother's milk. All other things are permitted. Also logical. But the halacha is not applied that way. This applies to all mammals in the milk of any other mammal. Now, the chicken thing is really crazy, because in the time of the Mishnah, and it's in the Mishnah, you can hear there's a Rabbi, Yochanan ben Norry, which is nice, Norry, it's totally coincidental. His position is objected to in the Gemara, but he held that chicken could be eaten with cheese. And not only did he hold it, he and his people did it. There's no question from the Talmud text that there was a time in the 1st, 2nd century when some Jews were still eating. In other words, the law was not always applied to chicken. There was a time when, and it's pretty clear why, which is that chicken is kind of like meat, like mammal meat. That chicken meat, if is kind of like that and could be mistaken. And it's enough like it that we're going to expand the fence of stringency to include chicken. It doesn't have milk. I mean, it's patently absurd. Those other things applying stringently or leniently make sense. Only that kid? Sure. All kids? Sure. You want to apply broad, but there's no milk. Well, I mean, how could you apply it to chicken? It literally doesn't make sense.
Because it looks like it, so it could give the impression of impropriety.
Right. So there's the reason why you would extend a leniency or why you would extend a stringency can be varied. Maybe you think this law really should apply to all things. Okay. You believe that's the intent of the law as written. You don't think when the Torah meant only goat A and mother A, you think it meant all things. So you interpret it that way. You extend that, not because you think that's the intent of the original, but because you think there's a practical. People might make a mistake. They think it's chicken, but it's not. And now they've broken the halacha. And if you think there's a consequence to sinning, then you don't want to do that, by mistake even. So I tell you what, just to be safe, let's also include chicken. Right? I mean, that's a reasonable motivation to extend a stringent. But you know, you don't have to agree with that. You could think that's dumb. You could think we should be able to eat chicken parmesan, and you would have what to stand on. You still couldn't do it because the halacha does not permit it. There's no question about that. But there was a time when, for some people, the halacha did permit it, and they had a minority practice. There's no question about that. Okay,
To
you
choose
ready?
four
Yeah.
opinions, I think I could find a rabbi that would let me do it.
At a certain point, you can't, right?
Not a conservative one.
Because we're a normative practice, right? It's not otherwise ein la davar sof. There'd be no end to the leniencies you could create, right? You have to accept a certain normative practice at a certain point, or you're just flying out there on your own, and anything that a Jew does is Jewish, right? I don't think you can. That's too boundaryless.
All right, I'll
So,
stick with the fake chicken.
yeah, you got to stick with the fake chicken. Of course, the great debate amongst those who don't eat like me is: do you eat the real burger with the fake cheese, or the fake burger with the real cheese? That's a Talmudic debate that's of tremendous importance. Great. Thank you, everybody. Any other questions, comments? This was great. Super duper. I'm glad we got through both of those today.
Just
Well
a
done.
little technicality. Why does
Yes.
it say halav after suet?
It's not chalav, it's chalev.
Chalev, okay.
Chalev. It's spelled the same, but chalev is fat. And chalav is chalav because it's fat, it's cream, right? I mean, it's milk is called chalav because it is, milk fat is, it's buttermilk, right? It's that's the connection. Chalev is first, chalav.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you very
everybody.
much.
This was
Thank
great.
you.